everyone. We will go ahead and get started. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is located on the table outside as well as on our website. There is also an automatic external defibrillator that is available on the back wall of the legislative chambers. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin with the agenda for the Douglas County Board of Equalization. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Boyle? Here. Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Friend?
Here.
Commissioner Garcia? Commissioner Morgan? Commissioner Rogers? Madam Chair.
Present. Item A, approval of the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. Item B, call for a meeting and set Tuesday, February 28th, 2023 as a date for hearing on certified assessment corrections reflecting the addition of omitted property to the tax rolls or increased value on property. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Morgan. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Citizen comments. Is there anyone in the chamber or on Zoom wishing to speak to the Board of Equalization about an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to resolutions D, E, F, and G, F, G, and H. There's no need for an executive session, so we can add adjournment to that motion if the board desires.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Morgan. Motion passes 7-0.
Agenda for the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Boyle? Here. Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Friend?
Here.
Commissioner Garcia? Commissioner Morgan? Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Madam Chair.
Present. Item A, approval of the minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. And item B, approval of claims submitted for payment processed through Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Commissioner Morgan, second by Commissioner Rogers. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next is the consent agenda, items A through E. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Friend. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next, our recognition and proclamations. We have two employees that are retiring. Susan Christensen, who worked for the Douglas County Health Center for 13 years, and Joyce Talbert, who worked for the Douglas County Health Center for 20 years. I don't think either one of them are present, but the board does wish them great success. Thank them for their service to Douglas County. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Please vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can go ahead now. Okay, motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Boyle. Motion passes 7-0.
Citizen comments. Is there anyone in the chamber or on Zoom wishing to speak to the Board of Commissioners about an item not on the agenda?
Good morning. Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha 68132. I visited 3 key senators yesterday down in Lincoln. Talked to them about some of the legislation that has been offered and talked about here also, and that you folks apparently support. So do some of the other civic bodies here in Omaha. Had a neat experience with the Omaha Public Schools the other day. They called, I guess, might be an emergency meeting on a day other than what they usually meet. And of course, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, when most parents are still getting their kids out of school or home or supper, and probably weren't even aware of it. And it was about legislation that they're pushing that's not necessarily in our favor. There was no citizens there but me. That's kind of surprising, but it isn't, actually, because I couldn't find out much of it very easily on their website. All of these things are part of the Open Meeting Act, or the intent of the Open Meeting Act. So I'm going to submit a copy of an email I sent out last night. I sent some others out before, but the subject basically of this one last night was about today's civics. Meeting 3 key senators yesterday. They were all friendly, and I informed them I would be sending them emails regarding the subject line, which is Convention of States, or LR 31, and that I've already contacted Douglas County, the City Council, the Douglas County Attorney, the Nebraska Attorney General, the Douglas County Sheriff, and I'll be sending something to them and the mayor, the OPS board, about it. I don't think I should have to spend my money or other citizens' money to sue under the Open Meetings Act, when the Douglas County Attorney and the Nebraska Attorney General are charged with enforcing that act as it says in its own printing. I won't read through all of these, but I would like them entered into testimony, and I am formally requesting a joint meeting with possibly the City Council and the Omaha Public Schools. The main reason is, even out in Fremont, Nebraska, they're even more friendly than things here in these chambers are. They talk back and forth with citizens. They don't interrupt them. They don't have uniformed officers sitting next to you. They did try to close down citizen comments. They had some good discussions back and forth. Citizens defeated them on it. They've been defeated here a couple of times too, not only in this board, but City Council in the past year. So I won't comment about all the other things, but this is all about various attempts to remove citizen comments altogether. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the board about an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to our presentations. I thought I saw.
He was here. Do you want me to grab it?
Yeah. Our first presentation is from Mr. George Achola for the Douglas County Justice Center building project update. Good morning, George.
Good morning. Well, good morning, Board of Commissioners.
Good morning.
George Achola, appearing on behalf of the JCDC. I'm here to kind of give you a status update on the Hall of Justice, the Douglas County Justice Center project. And so I'll go ahead and get started. And as I go through the presentation, hopefully at the end, I'll take questions at the end, but I'll go ahead and get started. As we started out this project a few years ago, as you can see the building, courtyard, it looks like, we're basically getting near the end. When we started out this project, there was 3 guiding principles that we looked at. Number 1, we wanted to address the Douglas County needs for the juvenile courts, the space needs. We were getting additional judges, and there was not enough room for judges, so we needed to have additional courts, and we had judges basically being in closets, and now we have judges that are hopefully going to be in more professional spaces that are more conducive to the work that they've got to do. Number two is to improve the juvenile justice system with a transformative design to serve the children and their families. And number three, hopefully build a building that is designed to inspire civic pride. The scope of the project as we started it was, and has always remained consistent since it was approved. Number one, it was a tower consisting of 8 stories that was going to house the heart of the Douglas County justice system, which is the public defender, the county attorney, and as well as the courthouse for the juveniles and the juvenile judges. The second part of it was the 1723 building, formerly known as the MUD building. That was a 4-story building, and that was primarily for probation and for some community programs as well. The third component of that was 4-story youth center with 64 finished beds, and the thing that tied it all together and attached it to this specific facility that I'm standing now on is the connection, or the skywalk connection from the Justice Center to the Hall of Justice. The base budget, this is the base budget that was approved as far as the bonds and additional funding. It was about $128 million, and this kind of shows where the base budget was. At top, you see what the construction budget was $111 million, with additional roughly about $17 million for soft costs, and you have about $1.5 million left in contingency as this project is moving along. So just another way to take a look at where we're at right now, kind of a snapshot. The top graph shows where we are overall. We're about 87% done with the project, with about 13% soft cost. The bottom left is what's been expended. That's what's overall has been paid out. 81's been expended, and 19% is remaining. On the bottom right, it's what's been paid out to keep it to date. 82% expended, and about 18% remaining. So as you can see from the numbers, this project is moving rapidly toward the end line. The timeline, the schedule has remained fairly consistent. As I sit here today, we're heading in toward March. March is kind of, from a contractual basis, kind of a substantial completion date, but then we've got the occupancy or the operational phase that will probably start sometime in March and probably go through June and July. And your county departments, public defender, county attorney, the courts have all been working with our team and the building commission, and as well as county staff, to make sure that the transition for the various different departments happens smoothly. Some of those departments are in the process of beginning that planning, and hopefully as we look forward to the transition, will be a smooth and orderly transition. Project status, the tower completion date, this is project status, that's 1:30. Kind of where we're at right now. We're beginning the city permits process. The elevator inspections are in progress. The fire alarm pre-testing is in progress. The health department is coming in to look at some of the areas, and then we have a final inspection pending, as well as a certificate of occupancy. Some things that have to be left from the owner's side. The commissioning, that's ongoing by a consultant. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment procurements are in progress, and IT and audiovisual procurements are in progress, as well as installation. We're looking for the occupancy process to begin May 1, 2023. The youth center, city building permits are in process. The elevators inspections are in process. The fire alarm pre-testing is in progress. The final inspection is pending. The certificate of occupancy is also pending. And some of the things from the owner perspective that we've got to continue working on is commissioning furniture, fixtures, and equipment to make sure that all those pieces are in place when folks move in. IT and audiovisual is also in progress, and the jail standards operational procedures have been approved by the county, and we look at occupancy beginning sometime in June of 2023. The 1723 building, as you can see, is not on this because that was completed sometime in 2022 and is fully operational, and the probation folks have been occupying that space. Some pictures. I know most of you work downtown or come downtown. Here's a picture of the building. This is one of my favorite pictures because you can see the reflection of the Hall of Justice on that building. I think it kind of speaks volume to the beauty of the project. Second, there's just another view. You see the old MUD building, 1723, and the skywalk, as well as, again, the reflection of the Hall of Justice. Another view of the courtyard area. The courtyard area is almost substantially complete. There's some artwork that needs to be placed into there, some sculptures and some other artwork. But all that is in progress, so you'll probably see that sometime in March or April when those get installed. The skywalk, there's the skywalk. This is the youth center. Then in the vestibule, you know, as this thing gets commissioned, there's going to be some vestibules, and this is going to be the plaque that is going to be in the vestibule, recognizing all the people and, you know, the county commissioners, the city council, the judges, all the folks that were instrumental in making sure this thing got built on time and on budget and were a part of the process. This is another view of the stairs. Courtroom view here. And you can see the courtroom, well lighted. Now looking at the sky bridge here. This is level 5 reception view. Level 7 southeast corridor view. Nurse station view for the youth center, level 1. The youth center Howard admissions view. This is the youth center southwest day room cabinets view. This is the gym. You know, Commissioner Boyle, this is the legacy of your dad. He pushed for this to make sure that it was a full-size gym, and I think we were able to accommodate that. And as you can see, I think it's, in my opinion, it's a pretty impressive gym for a facility of this kind. And then on the lobby, I know you can't read it, but there's a view, there's a quote that's going to be in the lobby that I think kind of summarizes why this building exists. It's from a famous juvenile court judge in an article that he wrote in the Harvard Law Review. And the quote is basically going to be this, because I think hopefully when you walk into the building, this reminds you why, you know, this building exists. And the quote is basically this: the child who must be brought into court should of course be made to know that he is face to face with the power of the state, but he should at the same time and more emphatically be made to feel that he's the object of its care and solicitude. You know, that is the purpose of this building. Yeah, when you come in here, you're clearly facing the power and the resources of the state, but the state's primary motivation should also be the care and solicitude of you and your family. So, you know, I'll take questions, but the one thing I want to say as we head toward the completion of this project is that, you know, the team that was assembled to put this together in terms of your county staff, the building commission, HDR Burlington, and Kiewit, I can tell you, you know, having worked on projects, the way that this went and as smoothly as it's gone, knock on wood, is a testament not only to your staff, the building commission staff, and the team that you've assembled to make this happen, and you should be congratulated on that.
Thank you, George. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
George, who's your employer?
Burlington Capital.
I'm sorry.
Burlington Capital.
And what's their role in this process?
Burlington Capital is rolled by contractors. We are the owner's rep, which essentially is to make sure that the architect, contractor, and the team is all rolling forward in the same direction, in a nutshell. But it's more complex than that, but in a nutshell, that's what it is.
And just, we're making a record here, so the folks know Burlington Capital is a private for-profit corporation, right?
Much more complex than that, but in a nutshell, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that the public can get a fair understanding of the finances behind this. I appreciate the report. We don't really get too many numbers in here, but I've done some research and had discussions with our staff and finance director and the comptroller and others, so that we can lay out kind of the cost of the project all in. And Joe, if you could, just so that people have a understanding of this, taking off from what George just said about Burlington Capital, they have a contract to do what?
They are the project manager.
And how are they compensated?
I think they get a percentage.
Sorry, Mr. Lenz, I'm not sure your mic's on.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're compensated, they get a percentage, I think it's 2.25% of the project expenditures, I think it is. But they get paid on a percentage basis on a monthly.
And most of the financing for this is handled through the building commission, is that right?
Yeah, it's being primarily funded by the bond that the Building Commission floated about 3 years ago, and then that set up a project fund, and then all these construction expenses are paid on a monthly basis out of that project fund, which is administered by the Building Commission.
And what was the total of that bond?
The net proceeds were $117 million.
And in addition to the bond proceeds, there were other financing.
Well, if you look at the project cost of $128 million, how you get there is 117 from the bond proceeds. There was an agreement from Sherwood that I think upon completion of the building project, they would provide us with a $5 million award. And then the last piece counted toward the project is before we floated the bond, the Building Commission purchased the square block that MUD used to own and where the construction has taken place. They purchased that for $6 million. So if you add those three components together, you come up with a $128 million project cost.
And those are the costs that have been basically borne by the Building Commission.
Yes.
And we, Douglas County, reimburses them for those costs.
How that works is Douglas County has an agreement with the Public Building Commission that we reimburse them for the principal and interest payments on that bond.
So the $128 million total project cost, in addition to that, there's interest on that, right?
The interest is included in the bond payment, in the payments that we're reimbursing the Public Building Commission for. They send us the invoices, which is principal and interest, and we reimburse them dollar for dollar for that amount.
Right. So the bond itself is, I think you said 117 million?
That was the net proceeds, right?
Okay. On top of that, there would be interest?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have an idea of how much interest that would be for the?
I don't have that right in front of me, but it's a 30-year bond. We got a good rate on it. So it would be in the, tens of millions over 30 years.
In addition to these costs, the 128 million costs, the county has borne some costs directly, is that right?
Well, there's another component that's being funded.
Time.
Okay.
Let's see. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
So there's another component that is a $7 million piece that is used to being purchased by the county's public properties group, that's being used to purchase security equipment, audiovisual equipment, and furniture for the facility. And that's $7 million. And that is being funded from the proceeds of the Juvenile Justice Fund, which when we started this project, the county board approved $0.015 separate levy. That's included in our total levy, but it's a restricted fund, and that $0.015 generates revenues, which is being used to fund the cost of the building commission cost.
Okay. And I think when we talked yesterday, the bottom line was there's the 128 million project cost plus the 7 million. That would be a total of 135 million.
That's correct.
Offset by the end of project 5 million from Sherwood, which should bring a total to 130 million. So project cost basically 130 million all in, more or less.
Yes.
We're not including in that the interest on the 30-year bond. And one other question that I have is, in reviewing the direct county expenditures from this fund to date, from July 1st, 2020 to date, the county has expended directly from this fund $15,285,000 $285,751.16. I broke that out, and it comes out like this. We paid $10.2 million in interest on the bonds. We paid $3 million in professional fees, presumably Burlington Capital and others are in that. We paid $411,359.15 in rent to the building commission. And we paid $108,159.82 to .com as a chargeback. So directly to the building commission, we paid $13,755,760.07, and an additional $116,550 has gone to HDR, and J.D. Peterson Law Offices has been paid $70,737, separate from the professional fees mentioned above. So I guess the only discrepancy would be, we've got the $7 million county contribution that we talked about, and this $15 million, and I'm sure it's an accounting question, but are these the same things, or are these in addition to what we just talked about?
The $7 million is being funded out of that fund too, the Juvenile Justice Fund.
Right.
So there is some overlap, yes.
Okay, because this $15,285,751.16 is coming out of the same fund.
Yes,
So that would be,
it's all coming out of the Juvenile Justice Fund, which
Okay.
is funded by the penny and a half levy.
so that's a difference of, roughly $7 million from the $7 million that we just talked about.
Well, yeah, but as you said, the big component has been the bond repayment, the 10.2 of it. So, so if you take that, and then I think
1 minute.
the payments to HDR and stuff, some of those are furniture or projects that they've done that we reimbursed them for, so that
Sure.
would be coming out of the 7 million.
Okay, I appreciate it. So all in, project cost to Douglas County and Douglas County taxpayers of $130 million, more or less.
That's what we view as the project cost,
Right.
yes.
I appreciate it. I just note that this project started off in the Chin report under $90 million and is now over $130 million, depending on how you do the cost. The interest on the bonds is the only thing that we've paid so far. We haven't paid really any principal, and that amounts to $10 million to date. And we're 3 years into the 30-year bond thing. It's a little bit like a mortgage. You pay a lot of interest at the front end of your mortgage as well before you get around to the principal, but that's what we're apparently paying right now.
Well,
Time.
we struck the deal.
Time.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Morgan and then Commissioner Rogers.
You go. All right. Well, I'm not sure I understood that. When you have a mortgage, all you're paying is your interest for that period of time. And that's all we've done. We haven't paid in advance on interest. And please, George, don't hesitate to interrupt me and correct me. The other thing is, I don't know where the $90 million came from. I know that the cost of for the county attorney, public defender, and all that, I think that was estimated at around the 90-some million dollars. And then the youth center was 26, 28 million, Commissioner Borgeson, as we went through that process. The amazing thing of this project is, and I've been in construction for a number of years, under the conditions that we've been under since COVID the last 3 years, there are not many or any projects that are on budget. And we've commented on that in building commission meetings and other times, and right here I've said that too, and asked the questions about it. We are on budget because of the way Burlington Capital worked at this with Kiewit and the other vendors on this project. And please give me constructive criticism on something I've stated that's incorrect. And same with you, Mr. Lorenz or Lori. And I know Lori's wasn't here last year, but Joe, you've been on this and heard the comments. So I don't want to say that it was a $90 million project from the get-go, because that was never the numbers I heard. And I'll let some of my colleagues correct me, as I always welcome that. Okay.
Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, Commissioner Morgan was on my same vein. I just want to know for the record, there was never stated a $90 million project. And two, I mean, we're very fortunate in some regard where we were able to get everything we needed before the supply chain process and hesitancy started. And so it's just worth noting and reiterating, at no point was 90 million ever mentioned. The number that was stated was adjusted only once, and that was for an extra 10 million the board put in because of cost. And other than that, that number, yeah, that hadn't changed. And in regards to a lawsuit that was put forward, we delayed it, and we would have been there $10 million cheaper. So I think to their credit, everything's been on. Everything's been, I mean, to the penny, on time, on budget, and it's been open every once a month, every Thursday for everybody to know. So I don't, there's no surprises. I'm glad we're finished to the end with it there, and hopefully with a little bit to give back. Thank you.
No other questions or comments? Thank you, George. And again, it's always nice to see on that monthly basis the progress that we've made, and knowing that we're in the home stretch here, and the good work that you said everybody has done together. It's been the largest project the county has ever undertaken, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, and I would reiterate, I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it either. So thank you.
With that, we will move on to the Douglas County Youth Center data report. Dr. Abby Carbaugh. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dr. Abby Carbaugh, Juvenile Justice Data Administrator for Douglas County. This is a year-end update population report, so we're going to show you some things that you've seen before, and then we've added some new things in just to give some context over what we've seen for the last year. So this is one of the new slides. This just kind of puts in the context our juvenile justice population in terms of the total juvenile population in Douglas County. So as of the 2021 census data, we had a little bit over 84,000 youth between the ages of 10 and 19 who lived in Douglas County. Information from .com reports illustrate that law enforcement had just under 2,900 contacts with youth under the age of 18 last year. So about 3% of the total youth in the county were having contact with law enforcement. Of those who had contact with law enforcement, in 2022, only 560 were admitted to DCYC, and on any given day, we had an average population of 69 youth in the Douglas County Youth Center last year. So again, this just kind of puts into perspective the number of youth who are coming into contact with law enforcement and who are coming into detention relative to the total juvenile population in the county. This shows our admission trends over the last probably 15 years. So overall, both of our adult court populations and juvenile court populations have been trending downward. We're still lower than we were in pre-pandemic numbers, but we did see an increase in 2022. We went from 608 total admissions to 749. Our adult court admissions were relatively stable, and the majority of our admissions we saw were for those youth admitted in juvenile court. We went from 485 in 2021 to 612 last year. Similarly, this shows our average daily population in the youth center. We've seen a substantial reduction in ADP compared to where we were a decade ago. We had 104 youth in detention in 2011 and only 69 on average per day in 2022. The juvenile court again showed an increase last year, as did the adult court populations, but we're still relatively lower than where we were pre-pandemic. This is another new graphic. So this shows the same overall information in terms of our total average daily population. That's the gray line on this graph. But then what you see in the bars there are the total population fluctuation. So what this shows is that for 2022, we had the ADP of 69, like we've seen in the other graphics. But then the blue bar shows our population fluctuation. So we had a high population point of 94 last year and a low population of 54. And then the next two slides are going to just break that graphic down again by the different court populations. So this is what we saw for the adult court. The gray boxes are a little bit shorter than what you saw in the blue boxes in the last slide. And what that indicates is that we have less variability in our population. So we had an average daily population of a youth in adult court of 27, and that fluctuated between an average population of 19 and an average of 37 throughout the year. And then with our juvenile court population, we have more variability. So again, last year we had 38 youth on average per day with juvenile court. We had a low of 27 and a high of 55. So we've had a decrease in our admissions, and we've seen a modest decrease in our average daily population. So what we want to look at next is our overall average length of stay. We've seen some increases over the years, but our adult court population has been over 100 since 2017. But in 2022, we are kind of coming down from that COVID spike where the adult courts were largely closed, and we're trending back towards those pre-pandemic numbers. The juvenile court processing has increased about 10 days post-pandemic, and this remains a little bit higher than what we were seeing previously. So in 2019, the juvenile court population was staying for an average of 33 days. In 2022, they were staying for an average of 44 days. This breaks that juvenile court population out a little bit more in a little bit more detail. So with our predisposition population, we saw an increase in 2020, but then our numbers have returned back to pre-pandemic numbers. So we have an average length of stay for those youth of 15 days during 2022. For the youth who are admitted on probation, their length of stay has been increasing for the last 3 years. So where they were at 28 days in 2018, they are at 38 days in 2022. The next series of slides just kind of brings us more into the current population and what things are looking like today. So this is from January 27th. The total population in DCYC was 87. We were holding 7 youth for other counties. We had 30 youth pending charges in adult court, and the remaining 50 were in Douglas County Juvenile Court. Of those youth in juvenile court, 15 were on a predisposition status, 17 were admitted while they were on probation for new law violations, and 18 were on probation at the time they were admitted, but they were placed in detention for reasons other than a new law violation. As we've seen in previous presentations, DCYC remains predominantly detaining youth of color, with 90% youth of color as of January 27th, and overwhelmingly male. We had 89% of our population male on January 27th. So this breaks those 4 groups of youth down into their overall lengths of stay. So as you can see, we have many youth in adult court who are staying longer. That's just because the adult court processes generally take longer than the juvenile court processes do. That includes decisions on whether the cases should be transferred to juvenile court. So it makes sense that we're seeing those dark blue bars over on the far right end of the graphic. So 1/3 of the predisposition youth population has been in DCYC for 60 days or longer, as well as half of the youth who are on probation with new charges. About half of the youth who are on probation have been admitted to detention without new charges. About half of the youth population who were admitted without new charges have been in detention for under 2 weeks, but there are a handful of youth who have been detained for 45 days or longer, and that includes 1 youth who has been in for 91 to 180 days, so between 3 and 6 months. This graphic breaks down for youth who are admitted on new law violations why they're coming in. So firearm use, homicide, firearm possession remain the 3 most prevalent offenses that we're seeing youth admitted to detention for. This is consistent across the adult population, the youth who were admitted for new charges while they were on probation, and the pre-adjudicated population. When we look at those probation youth who are admitted without new offenses, these are the predominant reasons why they are being admitted. So most have unlawful absences, while others are detained at court. They were admitted for a violation of probation or for a failure to appear in court. This slide just breaks down the number of girls that we had in detention. We've seen some increases lately, so we thought they were worth looking at. We had a total of 10 girls in detention on January 27th. 5 of those girls were also state wards. 2 were on probation and received new law violations. 5 were on probation and were admitted for, again, those unlawful absences, violations of probation, or being detained at court. And 3 were on a predisposition status. And then this slide looks at the state wards. Again, we've seen an increase in our state ward youth being admitted to detention. So on January 27th, again, we had those 5 girls who were state wards, and we had 13 boys. 16 of these youth, or 89% of the state wards in detention, were youth of color. 5 were in on adult charges, 7 were on probation with new charges, 4 were on probation without new charges, and 2 were in that predisposition status. Looking at our zip code map, again, over the last 15 years, most youth admitted to DCYC come from the eastern half of the county. Just over 1/4 of the youth admitted in 2022 lived in 68111, about 16% were in 68104, and 6% lived in 68107. And then using the snapshot from a couple of weeks ago, about 1/3 of our youth were from 68111, 8% were from 68105, and 7% each lived in 68104, 68107, and 68110. And then just a few other things to look at, things we haven't looked at in a lot of detail before. The first is looking at the risk assessment scores of these youth. So per statute, probation is the they make the intake decisions. They're the gatekeeper for DCYC, and they use a risk assessment instrument to score out youth and determine what factors should be taken into consideration when making that decision. So this is data from JDAI. We see that 25 youth who entered detention, of the 47 youth who were in detention a couple weeks ago, 25 of them either had no RAI score or their RAI score indicated that they were appropriate for a lower level alternative to detention. And so we have a lot of JDAI committees looking at these youth to figure out what are the service gaps that exist in the communities, why do we need to override these youth into detention, and what are the stop gaps that we're missing so that we don't have to rely on detention to manage these youth. Another important finding from the JDAI information is that 87 of the youth in DCYC on January 26th, they had a combined 625 missing youth reports prior to intake. So again, this further illustrates the degree to which we need some more of those front-end prevention and early intervention alternatives to keep kids from winding up in the system. And then finally, the federal government in recent weeks has started releasing their new grant solicitations for the upcoming fiscal year, and we are keeping an eye on that. So as part of that, OJJDP has released their 3 funding priorities, which are enhancing reentry programs and opportunities. So again, that will help us sort of on the back end alternatives, reducing the number of system-involved girls and providing gender-specific responses to system-involved youth, and providing training and technical assistance to address staffing shortages that we're seeing across the country and especially in justice-related fields. So that is the data update that I have for you guys this week, or this month, I guess. What questions, information do you have?
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thanks. Thanks for this. Do we have a hard copy of this report?
I left them on my desk. I apologize. I will bring them down.
If you could send them to us, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Just on the average daily population question, I think you indicated the snapshot that you took of January 27th, 2023, was it 89?
87.
87. And I checked it coming up for this report on the average daily population for the month of January 2023, I think was 84, and it's 84 today. So the new facility has a built capacity of what?
64.
Okay. That's going to be a problem if we're bumping up on the 84, 87, 89 numbers. Do we have a plan on how to handle that?
I am not aware, but there may be
That's
conversations.
fine. The questions that we had on this difference between the two big parts of the population, the children involved in the juvenile court system and the children involved essentially in the adult or district court system. And I think you indicated that of the 87 pop that you took the snapshot, 50 were juvenile, 30 were district court or adult court, and 7 were from other jurisdictions.
Correct.
Is that breakdown pretty consistent month to month? Is that how it breaks down usually?
It is pretty consistent, yes.
Okay. So this component involved in adult court, district court, they have the more extended average length of stay by a lot, right?
Yes.
Okay. And they're pretty consistent in that 30-ish range, is that right?
Yes.
So do you have a average length of stay number? And if you don't, for like the last year of 2022, for just those, and maybe you gave it to us and I missed it.
I do. It probably would have helped if you had your packet, if I'd remembered to bring them. So yes, we do. The average daily population for the adult court youth last year was 107 days, and the average daily population for juvenile court youth was about 45 days.
Okay. Is this is the graph of that?
Correct.
And so you indicated, now I recall, that there was a spike during the pandemic of the children involved in the juvenile court, not so much the children involved in the district court.
It was the opposite.
Oh, the children involved in the district court went up, and the children involved in juvenile court was relatively stable.
Yes.
Okay. And that had probably a disproportionate impact because the higher population was also staying longer?
So we had a smaller number of youth in adult court, but they were staying longer for that period of time.
I see. Okay. So those percentages that we just went between juvenile court children and adult or district court children, they remained consistent through the pandemic as well?
Yes.
There wasn't a big variation in that?
No.
It was just that the average length of stay went way up?
Yes.
I think I know the answer to this question, but why was that?
There were closures in the adult court system, and so they were not operating and processing individuals through in the same way that the juvenile court was.
Okay. And there was not a closure in the juvenile court judiciary?
Not to the same extent that I'm aware of.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'll look forward to the hard copy. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Boyle?
Thanks, Dr. Carbo. So just a couple things. We know the new center is going to have 68 beds, and that currently there are 87 juveniles in the juvenile system. So it's obvious we need to do things to decrease the numbers. It's obvious also by your presentation that length of stay seems to be a big part of it. I think a point to be made is just that this is really more of a detention center. It's not really seen as something where we're supposed to keep juveniles there long term. It's not a correction center per se. So during your talk, there were 3 things that kind of stuck out to me, and I'm just wondering if you could just provide some insight as to what types of relationships we're having with other organizations to address some of these issues, like those juveniles that have adult charges. It seems like they're staying much longer than they should be there, so we have to have more relationships with the courts. So if you could allude to that. Number 2 is the state wards. What are we doing to address the needs of those children? Because I'm not sure that juvenile detention is the best place for them. And then third is the missing youth. To find that they are spending time in a detention center when they really need care. And we know that they're missing for a reason. So it's not because it's not because they're bad kids as much as they may just come from very rough environments and have unstable home situations. So those 3 things, what can we do to get kids adjudicated, those who have adult charges? How do we address the state wards? And then what can we do for missing youth?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have information about our federal grants and the things that we're working on. I believe Kim is going to be presenting on that in a little bit. So I think I'll defer that to her if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you. And yeah, I know Kim's coming up to talk about services and programs, and some of this might kind of tie into that, but just some starter questions based on the data. Towards the beginning, there was the data point where 560 of the youth were detained out of 2875 that had law enforcement contact as a year-end figure. And considering that detention is so deep into the system, I guess it struck me as a high number, that 20% of those with law enforcement contact would make it that deep into the system. And maybe that's the norm across comparables as far as like other counties across the nation, or maybe it's not, I'm not sure. So that was just a figure that kind of struck me a little bit, and I just wanted your reflection on that figure.
So I think when I look at it, I think of it the opposite way. So I think that 80% of the youth who are coming into contact with law enforcement are then not being admitted to detention. So what my focus is on when we get to those youth and looking through the slides later on is looking at what are some of those gaps in the community and what do we have so that 80% of the youth who have come into contact with law enforcement are being able to remain in the community with their families in an alternate living environment, and what is it about these the 20% of youth that makes their cases significant enough to warrant detention? Is it the severity of their crime, or is it that we're missing the gap in services?
Yeah. I see what you're saying, though, because it just obviously should never be the norm that a child is detained, even if they come into law enforcement contact, whether it's a small fight at school or, in the neighborhood or whatever. So I guess I still don't see it as a good number.
No, I would agree, but I think it gives us a place to start and a place to start looking into what do we need to do for those youth. Where can we start digging in?
Quick side question. This kind of relates to services and programs that Kim's going to talk about shortly, but how much money do we filter into programs and sub-grants and subcontracts in juvenile justice services through the county?
So we have $11.3 million in juvenile justice grant funds. And again, I'll let Kim talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. Because, I saw that the figure of youth of color is at 90% at this point, which is an increase. Last year when we would talk about that figure, I think it stayed around 79, 80%. So that definitely struck me that it went up. And so when it comes to services and programs that are intended to tackle the disproportionality of youth of color in detention, I guess I'm just wondering, what are, first of all, some of the latest measures that are meant to tackle that issue of such a high number of youth of color in detention, but also what are some of the accountability measures that we have in place with this $11.3 million that is filtered through the county, to try to ensure that the money that we do put out there through grants and subcontracts is being effective, and how do we review those measures, which ones are working, which ones are maybe not working, and how do we adjust and pivot when we need to, because ideally we'd see at least a small amount of progress per year, even if it's just 1% from 79 to 78%, right? As opposed to an increase. So I'll wait to hear further from Kim on services and programs, but just kind of a quick highlight there. Last question, let's see if I have time to fit it in. You said probation, kind of the gatekeeper based on the score, the RAI score.
Yes.
Has there ever been an analysis on that
1 minute
point in the system as far as scoring, and if kids are treated the same? Is there any potential disproportionality in regards to scoring kids, and if maybe there's a bias in that scoring and in decision making at that point in the system? Has there ever been kind of any analysis?
So I believe there have been studies in the past for probation looking at that, and based on the results of that study, they've tweaked how they have the scoring on the instrument and how they're administering it. And I believe it's currently undergoing another study at the present time, just to see how the changes that they've implemented have had an effect in practice. But I don't know much more detail than that. I can get it for you if you'd like.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Morgan?
Thank you for your presentation. On the number 84, I think you said
87.
87. How many are from other counties? I know we had even some from Scottsbluff County in the last 60, 90 days, but
Yep.
Sarpy's the big one. How many are there now approximately?
So we had 7 youth who were in from other counties on January 27th. We averaged probably about 4 to 5 a day over the course of the year. So we had 2 from Sarpy County, we've had 2 federal marshal holds, and then 1 each from Scottsbluff, Hall County, and Lancaster County.
Okay. And I know we're paid a per diem on those from the other counties, and we've discussed that. The other thing is, we started on this over 4 years ago, before COVID, on this youth center. And I'll let Kim touch on this if she wants to, because she has the knowledge that I may have incorrectly. But the fact is, we've seen nationally, totally everywhere, nearly, that I've heard, a tremendous increase since COVID in the number of youth in facilities.
Yes.
And that's a constant thing that maybe Kim or one of you can touch on about that. The other thing we have going is Radius is one of the new programs that's getting started on 52nd and Ames, and there's quite a bit of construction underway there with a facility to help on our programs. That's going to be very significant, that did not exist, and
Yes.
that's our community working together. And I think that's another real positive. So hopefully we're going to see some things that'll turn this around. And none of us expected to see the kind of increase that we've seen. And I hope you can touch on that a little bit. When we planned this, no one knew 4 years ago, oh, I think there could be a COVID situation occurring in the next 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
Never would
No.
have anticipated this. So thank you for your time again.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thank you. Just a couple of follow-ups. I think there's a little confusion. Commissioner Boyle said there were 68 spots in the new facility, and I thought there were 64.
64.
64, thank you. And the average daily population in 2022 was 69, and the average daily population in January 23 is 84, and I think it's 84 today. You broke out the male-female component of this. They're segregated. They're kept in different mods.
Correct.
Okay. And so in the new facility, in the current facility, how many kids in a mod?
I believe it's 8. I believe it's 8.
Okay. In the new facility?
8 also.
Okay. So in the average daily population today, whatever, last month, what percentage of females?
So it was 11% as of a couple weeks ago.
Okay. So we'd be running right at that 1 mod for girls, basically.
Correct.
Right, okay. The population of children involved in juvenile court, children involved in district court, basically broke out because of seriousness of the offenses that they're being held on. Are those populations segregated as well?
I do not believe so.
Okay. And maybe this is a question for Kim, but so they're not segregated by court status in the current facility?
I believe court status may play a role in the classification instrument that's used to determine the placement, but I don't think they are classified and housed solely on their court status. I believe it's one component.
Okay, and as to that, Commissioner Garcia raised the point of these court status and release status analysis that we do, and whether or not there's racial bias in those, and you said that they're looking at that. There is a preponderance of majority by a lot in the actual incarcerated children, right?
Correct.
And do we know in the children that aren't incarcerated, the children that are processed, examined, and released, what the breakdown there is racially?
I don't know the specific breakdown, but I also do know that it is overwhelmingly non-white youth.
Non-white throughout then the whole population of children involved with the system, whether they're released into the community or they're incarcerated, are all are minorities.
Correct.
Do those percentages fluctuate?
They do fluctuate. I know with, for our diversion population, for instance, I think it is a higher proportion of non-white youth relative to white youth, just because, again, if we have youth who are lower risk, who are coming into the system for reasons they don't necessarily need to be, we are diverting more out. So they're not, they may have had, there's more disparity on the front end that is sort of being corrected to some degree at that point. But I don't know the specifics. I can get you more information.
And I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the majority minority population in that January 27 snapshot was like 90%?
Correct.
Okay. And you said, and correct me again if I'm wrong, that the same general percentage would apply to those children that were processed and released, 90% majority minority?
I believe so.
So
Yes.
throughout the system, it would be a 90%.
Throughout the system, I don't know the percentage. I apologize if I misspoke.
no,
I do know that there's the overrepresentation of minority youth at every point in the system. Whether it's to this extent or not, I can't speak to that.
I think I'd be interested in the same question that Commissioner Garcia raises. Is there
1
a
minute.
significant disparity between that overrepresentation of minorities in incarcerated youth and that overrepresentation of minorities in youth that are released? Thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions or comments for Abby? Abby, I just have a couple, and that is, it would be interesting if we could get, and I loved the first slide to put into perspective the number of youth versus the total number of youth in Douglas County. But what stuck with me is what Commissioner Garcia was talking about, and that was just the general law enforcement contact of the number of children.
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested to know the zip codes where those children are coming from with that law enforcement contact, if we could get that.
Yep, I can get that for you.
And the other, I still have huge concerns about the gun violence in this community, especially when it comes to our youth. As Kim and Commissioner Rogers and I spoke about the last time I mentioned this with the community summit around that, we kind of went in a different direction and had our resource fair, which was great for the first one, I thought. But I still keep wrapping back around to looking at these numbers and the increase in that and the age of the youth. And I think we just have to have some more conversation around that with everybody in this community. And then the 11% of the girls, that is a increase. I think you said that we generally were seeing like 4 or 5, so this is a little bit of an increase from the number of girls that we've seen at this particular snapshot, during this particular snapshot. And I would like to work with Kim and you a little bit closer on that girls issue. One of my other dreams has been to have a all-female facility, both for youth and for adults outside of our current ones. I think if we had a separate one and we could, and I did have conversations with the Sarpy County folks about this, because they house their females with us, well, juveniles a lot of times with us. But I honestly think that this community could, if we could engage in that conversation, I actually think we would be able to do a lot more in a separate girl-focused, women-focused facility, because going back to, this is going to date me, but your aunt, Marge Higgins. I remember, and Kim will appreciate this, I actually remember the very first conversation that I had about the women in the adult facility was with your aunt. And she was very upset that we were producing all of these programs and services, one being like work release, and none of the women at that facility were being able to engage in it because at that time, everybody who was a prostitution, brought in for prostitution was in the jail, and you couldn't very well release them on work release. And she said, then what are you going to do? And so she was very adamant, which I know you are too, about girls' issues. And so further discussion about that in our future, I think, is a very good conversation for us to have.
I would agree.
We're seeing different reasons why our girls and females are brought to our facilities. And I just think our programs and services could be better and more if we had the facility in order to do that. But thank you very much again for your report, always very thorough and very enlightening, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Next, we'll hear from Ms. Kim Havakati on the Douglas County Youth Center Programs and Services Update. And before she begins, on behalf of the board, Kim, I would like to say how sorry we are about the passing of your father. I'm sorry.
Kim Havakati, Deputy County Administrator over Juvenile Justice Reform. As we were talking about the girls before I get into my slides, one of the things I did want to point out that I think is extremely important with our girls is the length of stay. When you look at the length of stay with these girls, we have our 10 girls, 2 are on probation with new charges. They've been in there over a month, but look at the length of stay on the predisposition girls that have been in there. They've been in there 71 days. That's a long time. That's almost 3 months. So when you look at our girls, you have to particularly look for our length of stay.
Can you tell us what predisposition is, please?
Sorry, predisposition is what we always call it's county pay, but it's youth that have not been adjudicated yet, so they are not under probation jurisdiction. They are under the county's jurisdiction at that point. That is predisposition. I thought what might be beneficial today, and then I'll get to some of your questions. I think over the past year and a half, and you've asked a lot of questions, some of you have, on our grant funds that we have received, where they're all going, that we would do a quick synopsis of all the grant funds that Douglas County is currently administering, because it will get to some of your questions as to our priorities. So our first, of course, is our 2022-23 community-based grant funds. That comes from the state of Nebraska, the Crime Commission. We dispersed $1.3 million. We just submitted our 23-24. These funds have to be used for early intervention and diversionary services. We have targeted the highest need communities by looking at these services for 23 and 24. We've pretty much divided it up between North and South Omaha. Almost all of our services, in fact, I think all of them are east of 72nd Street, targeted within our communities of need. We also have a 2018 OJJDP Title II Racial and Disparity Grant. We are on the last year of that. It ends in December of 2023. These funds have been used recently in order to pay for our stability services. I know we've talked about those. Those are for our youth that are on the home program. They are on electronic monitoring to get them out of detention. We have always believed that just putting a monitor on a youth is not sufficient, that you also have to have services for that family in the home and for the youth. So we have contracted with providers in our community that are providing these stability services to maintain. These funds are also used to provide some gender-specific services within DCYC. We do have some services that come in and work with those 10 girls I just talked about every week on gender-specific issues. We also are in the process, and in fact, I just have the rough draft of it. These funds were used to complete an educational analysis of DCYC by the Education Rights Council, because we all know how important education is. We should be able to report out on that report within the next 30 days as to what they found from an educational standpoint. Next one is the 2020-21 OJJDP Title II Racial and Ethnic Disparity Grant. That's a 3-year grant. It's $950,000. What we did as a county, we did a competitive RFP process where anybody in the community could apply. These funds were awarded to community providers to impact racial and ethnic disparities. So they were targeted within 8 various community providers in this area. 1/3 of the funds are going to North Omaha located community providers, 1/3 to South Omaha community providers, targeting those specific zip codes. We also have seen an increase in our system with the immigrant refugee population. So 1/3 of these funds are going to our immigrant refugee services within our community. We also have a 2020 OJJDP reducing the use of isolation in juvenile facilities. That's a 3-year, $600,000 grant. Just as a reminder, this is how we were able to obtain a full-time clinical psychologist on board. We have trained all staff on motivational interviewing within DCYC, and we're getting ready to train this fall all staff on Target, which is a trauma-effective regulated type of treatment of staffing needs for us. We're looking at policies, and there's also an external evaluation. We have a 2021 BJA, Bureau of Justice Administration, mental health grant. That's a 3-year grant. This is paying for our licensed mental health practitioner, one of them at DCYC, and it also is bringing in virtual reality technology into the detention facility as a de-escalation technique for our youth. We have also a 2021 OJJDP Comprehensive Youth Violence Prevention. That was a $900,000 one. This funding was specifically used and obtained to increase staffing at U-Turn. U-Turn is one of our major gun and gang violence programs in the community. It's really targeting early intervention services within the middle schools in gun and gang violence. As Commissioner Borgensen said, we have seen a huge increase in gun violence in our community. This is a grant that we're using for that. Also, U-Turn is coming in daily to the Douglas County Youth Center to visit with our youth within DCYC that are there because of gun charges. And as if you notice from Abby's data, that is substantially the majority of them, so that they can start building the relationship to work with these youth once they leave the facility. This is a 2022 one. We just received this one. This is the Reducing Risk for Girls in the Juvenile Justice System. It was a $525,000 grant. Commissioner Boyle, going to yours. These funds will be used to increase our Missing Runaway Youth Task Force. We know how important those missing runaway youth are. We have, through community-based grant funds, a specific therapeutic-based service for South Omaha. We did not have one for our North Omaha girls. So this funding will be used to put together a therapeutic for our North Omaha girls, because we know how important. We've got to get to these girls sooner while they're missing and running. And then we also got 2022 OVC, Office of Violence, field-generated strategies, again, to deal with the criminalization of minor victims of sex trafficking. We know the majority of our girls in detention have been trafficked. They might not define it as stuff, but we as adults do define it that way. We also know we have to get at them sooner and earlier. So this $980,000 is going out to contracts in the community, again, to work with that Missing Runaway Youth Task Force. They're going to have an attorney from Education Rights Council, because we know educationally these girls have a lot of needs, and then also for shelter care services, because some of these girls cannot go home. So that grant is just starting as of this year. And then the last grant that we received just recently, right before Christmas, was a 2022 OJJDP Youth Violence Prevention Program grant. That's close to $250,000. These funds will be used to provide intensive early intervention services. What we have found with our juvenile assessment center is that the severity of the youth that they're getting referred to diversion have higher and higher needs. And so this grant is to build up some community providers to meet those higher needs for those youth on diversion so we don't have to file. And then, of course, there is the Sherwood Foundation $5 million grant for programs and services. As of today's date, none of those funds have been expended. So questions?
Okay. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thank you. Thanks for this. And this is a healthy amount of grants, $11.3 million. The term of these grants annual, is this $11.3 million in a
No.
fiscal year?
No, it's over 3 years. Other than the community-based grant funds, that $1.3 million that comes every year from the state, the rest of these are all $3 million, 3-year grants over that time period.
Beginning like this fiscal year?
Some began last January, some will begin this January.
So this is a snapshot of our ongoing grant-funded initiatives?
Right.
Okay. Just help me out a little bit on acronyms. I caught most of them, but OJJDP is the Office of Juvenile Justice something?
Delinquency Prevention.
Okay. And is that a Department of Justice entity?
Yes. It's part of Bureau of Justice Administration. It is our juvenile justice arm.
Federal?
Federal.
Right. Under the Justice Department?
Yes.
Right. The breakout on the community grants, and there appear to be a couple of categories. And maybe I interpreted this incorrectly. There's the Sherwood grant of $5 million over 5 years. And is
Yes.
that commenced? That's in,
It is $1 million a year starting last year. So there is $1 million from 2022. We have not received yet the 2023, but it is $1 million a year over 5 years.
I see. I guess I was conflating that with the community Nebraska state ones.
Right.
Those are state government grants.
Right. Those are state government grants that flow through the Nebraska Crime Commission.
So the 5 million Sherwood is a component of this 11 million overall?
Yes,
Right.
it is.
When we talk about private grant funds, community grant funds, are there any other private local grant funding agencies currently?
For the county, no. There are a lot of private
Sure.
funding
I'm just trying to
sources,
say
yes.
That's the whole picture of the private funding in this
Right.
category.
Right. For the county, from the county perspective, yes, Commissioner.
Right. Thank you for this.
Okay.
Commissioner Boyle?
So I'm just going to thank you for that, and also just go back and ask the questions I had asked Dr. Carbaugh. So again, it seems like one way to decrease the population in DCYC is to address length of stay, and a significant number of juveniles in the system have adult charges, and that seems to increase length of stay. And then you mentioned what we're doing for missing youth, and then state wards. So those are the 3 categories. I feel like if we can address those, we could accommodate the center a little bit better. So it's those kids on adult charges that are being held, those that are state wards, and then you briefly address the missing youth initiatives.
With regards to those youth on adult charges, we have met with the Chief Justice. We've also met with the presiding judge here in Douglas County in the district court. What the agreement is and what we are doing now is we supply to the presiding judge of the district court every month a list of all the youth that are charged in the adult system sitting at DCYC by judge and how long they've been sitting, so that she can then get that to the other judges to know how long these youth have been sitting. Part of the issues in our discussion that came up when it comes to the justice computer system, if I'm a district court judge, I do not know that this name is a juvenile. I just know it's a name on my caseload. So this is the way we came up with notification of the district court judges that this individual youth has been here for over 6 months. What can be done? That's the process we're trying to do, is to alert the judges. And that would give the presiding judge the ability then to go to the other judges and say, why have you done 3, 4, 5 continuances? What do we need to do?
So do you feel like with the new center, there will be efficiencies to help address that better with the new building?
I hope so. The communication, yes. But again, I think for any of us that have practiced in both courts, there is a big difference between district courts and juvenile courts. Juvenile courts have more hearings, they do them faster, you can get in. District court, you might be waiting, and sorry, Commissioner Kavanaugh, you might be waiting 30, 60 days just to get that 15-minute hearing. Juvenile court, you can get in within a week.
So does district court, did they do anything, is there an incentive or is there a feeling that they should be adjudicating these kids quicker?
I think there is, and I think there's been some discussions by our Chief Justice. What really takes the longest time period we have found when we look at the data are these motions to transfer to juvenile court. Almost every youth that is charged in adult court, if you're the defense attorney, you're going to file a motion to transfer in order to try to get it. Those seem to be taking months and months and months and months. Okay. That if we can shorten the time period on those, then they could get to the actual trial on the issues.
So that's a system problem.
That's a system problem.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And then what about the state wards? There are a fair number currently in the system.
We've set up a process where Health and Human Services and probation meet every other week to talk about these youth that are both on probation and our state wards. And we have just seen that number go up. Yeah. I am open to any ideas or suggestions because these youth are in both systems. Most of these youth, when you talk to either HHS or probation, are there because they cannot find appropriate placements. Or what you will hear in our community, that a lot of our placements potentials are not running at 100% because of staffing shortages. I know some of our treatment facilities are running at about 60% capacity because they can't hire the staff to run them, which then means it falls back on detention, that they're sitting longer as they're trying to get up to speed again. COVID has really impacted staffing shortages.
Do you feel that the state wards, is this all part of, for example, the foster system too? Or
very much, very much.
Okay, so we have to beef that.
Because some of these youth do not have families to go home to, that they came out of foster care, and they can't find foster parents that are willing to take these youth.
So would that be a county problem or a state problem?
That's a state problem. That's a HHS problem.
HHS, okay.
They're the ones that contract with all the foster care agencies.
The state does, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Friend?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Kim, so you and I have talked about this, but it's been a while. When I actually broached the subject matter, I think it was privately with you. Between the OJJDP at the federal level or the Crime Commission at the state level, what do those reporting periods look like? When do you have to send them metrics on the grants that they approved for us?
It's every 6 months, so it runs on a 6-month time period. Okay. So they're due by the 30th day of the month following the end of the year. So January 30th and July 30th is when we have to send all of our reportings. Oh. And yes, there are extensive reporting requirements for each one of these grants.
Of course, and again, I say this a lot, but I'm not trying to give you a to-do, but is there a way when those report, and maybe we're not privy to it, or maybe it's proprietary information from the standpoint that the county is not dispersing those funds, can we see what those metrics look like on an annual basis? Or,
sure.
So in other words, the success stories that we can quantify need to be trumpeted, I think. And not that anybody's watching us right now, I don't really know. I guess we'll find out. When we can do those type of things, and we show that the $11 million is being invested in a way that is, preventing some of the unfortunate incidents with our youth that we can quantify, then we're ahead of the game. I mean, maybe we can articulate that pretty well and get the word out, on occasion. So. I know all I had to do was ask you for it. I guess that's what I'm doing now, and maybe it could be presented in a forum like this on a, quarterly basis or an annual basis. So,
And there's twofold that we do for all of these grants. One, of course, the federal government requires that you have to report on the data, and they have their set metrics that they want for each one of these grants, and yes, we can get you those. But Dr. Carbaugh has also set up for some of these grant our own data collection that we want from some of these entities so we can get to just what you're talking about. So yes, going forward, we will gladly get you all of that, and we will tell you which is the federal reporting and which is what we're hearing from the reporting from the various agencies we're funding.
that's great. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Morgan?
Kim, you heard my comment about the increase since COVID on the youth and nationally. And my material or information may be inaccurate. I wanted to get your read on what I stated.
It is very much true. I was at a national conference a week ago with all the heads of the 50 states of their juvenile justice system. Every one of them is saying they've had a 50 to 75% increase in their juvenile justice system and who's coming. They also said they're seeing younger and younger, just like we are, that it is no difference. We had a lot of discussions about how you create appropriate services for a 13-year-old compared to an 18-year-old. Those are very different services, but our system is getting inundated with a lot of 13, 14-year-olds. So no, it is a nationwide phenomenon, not just here.
And that's since COVID.
It's been since COVID.
And where was the conference? Just curious where you were.
Well, it was in Orlando, okay?
Oh, I'm so sorry. You
I
have to
know,
go there.
it was really bad. And it was really cold up here, so I did kind of relish
And
it.
when you talked about the youth ages, which is really sad, I mean, right in our own community, we had that 6-year-old that took a gun to school and shot the teacher. I mean, which is unbelievable to me, honestly. I mean, it's just so hard to fathom that. So, thank you.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Coming back to this court type and the impact on our system, just so folks know, that's beyond our control. The judiciary is a separate branch of government.
It's very much beyond our control. Just like I always talk about the front door and the back door to the Douglas County Youth Center is beyond our control.
Right.
So,
So, I mean, we do what we can, and you know, these programs, I think, over time should have some effect, but we can't tell the judges who to process and when to process, and we can't tell the county attorney who to charge and how to charge them, right?
correct.
So when we're looking at these average length of stay numbers between the adult court, the district court, and the juvenile court, pretty significant disparity over time, going back quite a while. But we're seeing some kind of, I guess you'd call it bracket creep, particularly in the district court. This is pre-pandemic, where we're bumping up over 100 days, average length of stay, 114 in 2017, 112 in 2018, 102 in 2019, before we get to the COVID bump of 181 days. And now 2022, where we're trying to get past the COVID thing, we're 107 days. So it looks like 100 plus days is kind of the new normal in district court. Whereas the juvenile court, if you go way, way back to 2007, it was 36 days. And you come up to, as recently as 2019, it was 32 days. Since COVID, it's kind of creeped into the 40s, and maybe that's going to go back down. But that seems to be a much more stable kind of number versus the district court. And just so folks know, because it is beyond our control, but we try. I know that you regularly meet with the courts to talk to them about this particular problem, and those discussions are ongoing, like your programs are ongoing, and hopefully over time they would have some impact. But you can't tell them what to do, right?
I don't have that magic wand.
So we do what we can. I think it's important for people to understand what Douglas County can do and what Douglas County can't do. And this grant report is a good example of we can do this, and we do it more and more robustly, and kudos to you and your staff for doing that. But this is not something that we can directly impact, right? So,
Correct.
thank you for that.
Commissioner Rogers?
Thanks, Kim. Like if I can point out to the board a couple of things that Kim mentioned. I think one, she mentioned the Sherwood money. I want to put the board on notice that there will be a request coming for a distribution of that money from last year's piece, probably for about probably somewhere around 500,000. That's in respects to services mentioned years ago with the building. Kim's been talking about in the committee meeting here about the development of the bridge program, which is known as the Family Resource Center, and the work that's being done there. That executive director was formally hired in January, and it's Marion Fay, and she's been hitting the ground and setting up organizations. So the hope is that within the next 6 months, with some of that organization and other things that's going on, there will probably be a first distribution there for startup cost and getting structure there to have that programming in place to get up in front in some of Abby's numbers presented there for some of those other services. When you talk about the number of kids of color, and particularly when you look at the juvenile numbers, and if you can go to that slide, Abby, where the slide that had the length of stays by 30, 60, and 100 increments, or Kim.
Do you want the length of stay?
So I just say, when you look into hopefully what the bridge and other things along the line of continuum services, when you get to when the first graph showed the context and what we're looking at numbers-wise and actually where it is, the smaller those numbers get, the more complicated the services and the issues with the family gets. And it just happens to be the majority of those kids of color. You look at, when you show the slide and it shows where the area is, those are the areas with all the social factors that have those issues. So the heart of it is up there. The social factors on the outside are influencing the inside, because if a kid's sitting there on juvenile charges, they're sitting there waiting for a service. So Kim, if you go back to that slide with the days, I think she mentioned in the report
with the
too,
days.
The 30, 60, 90. She mentioned in the report as well some of the services going on. Now, there was some discussions in the past, and if you look past the 30 to 45 day period, at the 35 there, not the adult charges, but the juvenile charges on down. Take out new charges section. Those other things down there, those numbers, everything is on the margin in there. There were discussions that happened with probation last year about a couple of grants, and my understanding they weren't interested at the time. You see from those numbers, most of these kids here at the probation level, and I think it was alluded to by Commissioner Boyle, mentioned by Commissioner Kavanaugh. We don't have direct control on a lot of things, but I remember here about 12 years ago, the juvenile court went over budget about $1 million+ in regards to guardian ad litem, and the board ratcheted up the pressure to get that under control. This is one of those times where we don't control a lot of this, but there are grants available in that last slide that Kim talked about that specifically are partnership with the state and the county. And this is where the board leveraged its flexibility to the state. The state was not interested before. They should be interested now, because these numbers clearly point to that, and we need them to partner with us to be able to apply for that money to get the services, and I think there's a good chance that we can get that money in that regard. So the other point just to note is that they're in there, and we can probably get into them in an amount of time, but we're planning on presenting this quarterly, but monthly in the committee meeting, we'll be getting into this and digging into certain sections to peel that back. The point to be made in there is that state law says there's some kids, I believe, that we need to question that are sitting in there for lack of service, and they should not be sitting in there. The rationale is capacity of staff. That's not a reason to sit there, and now is the time that funding should be asked for to increase the services, but also the issue of paying people more. We've had to pay people more to meet our need from that end. And we also face a capacity issue on our end in regards to that facility because the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I'll come
Time.
back.
No other lights. Go ahead and continue.
And I'll finish because of the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Our capacity is 96. That is down over the years. Just like the state can say that they don't have capacity to place something and they need to address it, we're working now to address the fact that if we can't hire workers on the end of DCYC, then we're on a de facto cap because you can't have a certain amount of kids over what you have staffing. So just like we're having to work on that, they're gonna have to work on this issue of capacity because capacity is not a definition in the law in regards to why a kid can sit there. So the summation of all of this is every system point has its day in the sun, has had its day in the sun from when we started this 10 years ago and it was DCYC till there was some other points. And now the day in the sun comes from the processing of the piece. And yes, we cannot tell them exactly what to do, but by bringing it here, by pushing it, the point is everybody's gonna have to do their piece to move that. And as we did in November when it was put here, this again is another effort to put on warning. We need the state to step up on this process piece, and that's gonna have to change to some degree. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
No other lights, and I think I guess a parting point is, a lot of times we look at issues and this isn't the first and it won't be the last, but we're always trying to fix things on the back end of a system. And we know that doesn't work. And so the more we can get at the front end, and that goes to Commissioner Rogers' point about social determinants and specific areas that we know are having troubles with a lot of those social determinants and crime, that's where we should, again, as a community, try to focus rather than waiting until things get to where we are in the youth or in the juvenile justice system, and then again, ultimately at the youth center. It is not upon us as a county or our juvenile detention center to fix the system. And we need everybody on board to do this and do it early and do it on the front end. And as Commissioner Morgan mentioned Radius, we also have Child Savings Institute going to be adding shelter beds. And so besides all of the work that Kim is doing with the community to increase programs and services, there are organizations out there that are doing or increasing their services or bringing up new services as well that she's working intimately with. So again, I think there's good things happening and good directions that we're going. But I think we need the community to start having those discussions on the front end about a lot of the social determinant issues. So with that, thank you very much, ladies. You did a great job as always. Yep, go ahead.
Larry Shore, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132. Very nice long presentations today, but I have to take issue with just a couple of things. First of all, I'm not totally deaf. I can hear most everything going on today down in this chair, mainly because I'm hearing speakers from the back of the room, but simple little things like I'd have to go home and play this back in order to understand what Mr. Rogers was saying, because he doesn't speak into his microphone. That's a very simple solution.
Okay, get to the agenda.
Okay, all right, yeah. And we can't necessarily fix everything at the front end. And I'm sorry, social discrimination, I think I heard that terminology. Maybe the word discrimination was different, but that's because you don't speak loud enough. But, you know, you can't fix all of this stuff. You don't have enough experts, and even the experts don't completely understand it. They have checklists, yes, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problems. And I don't know that taxpayers can bear the cost of solving all the problems. And one of the problems may be not getting enough of the cooperation of the churches and the families in the city and the county. But look at this. Isn't this embarrassing? There's what, 2 or 3 citizens here? Some of them might be reporters. It's a real civic thing. And I don't know why we have so many of the lawyers and department heads sitting up there, because citizens cannot engage any of them. That's a waste of their tax, their salaries, and I have to pay for those salaries. So let's find a smaller room and put the money you save
Agenda item, please.
into fixing the problem.
Thank you. All right, with that, no other questions or comments. Good morning. I think it's, yep, good morning.
Jaquela Yarbrough, CEO of Compete Technologies, and nonprofit Compete Institute of Socioeconomic Policy and Education, 2417 Burdette Street, Omaha, Nebraska, 68111. Thank you all for your time this morning. Took a few notes, tried to write as rigorously as I could, but I did want to address just the presentations as they flowed. I'll flow in that same order. What I have here, the top of my notes here, is just the standards for the detention piece in the new facility. We had some questions a while ago, I want to say at the October and then December board meeting regarding updates that were necessary to make that place more usable for the children that will be incarcerated there for whatever length of time they'll be. We were wondering about the on-site food facilities. Were there going to be any on-site cooking facilities available? Was there going to be any on-site laundry added to the facility? And had they also increased the size of the holding cells? And there was no update, to my knowledge, provided to the public on that. And I don't know the format you guys want this to take. Is this kind of a Q&A or just keep rolling with my questions? And then, all right, we'll keep rolling. Let's see. What concerns me the most, again, our nonprofit is formed. I guess I'll start from a basic point of, as a data scientist and a Black female data scientist in the state of Nebraska, I'm always charged with the objective, forming an objective perspective to how the numbers look and how they work for all of us. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how the data presented, well, I do understand. From a qualitative perspective, this data looks like it's going to be effective. From a quantitative perspective, meaning for those of you who are not in data, qualitative is just the raw data. It just gives us a transaction in data. Doesn't give us a story about it, doesn't tell us why those numbers exist. It just says this is a point in that data. But the qualitative perspective is going to give you a full perspective and outline of how did we arrive at that point in the data. Something is terribly wrong if 11.5% of the population is 90% of the youth in detention. I will say that over and over and over again. Something is terribly wrong if 11.5% of the youth incarcerated, or the population, represent 90% of the youth incarcerated. I think we all are very fine people and we want to reach great solutions. However, I'm dealing with the fallout personally in my community. Okay, I took 7 kids to school. They're not missing. They might have problems at home. So I do have a problem with just the way qualitative data tends to be presented. And it's not perhaps presented in a way that gives the full narrative. And so I do want to say that there are solutions to Commissioner Morgan's point. He said, with the Radius program, they did some great things that didn't exist. But I want to tell you, I can speak to 12 organizations that do that work, and we dance in circles all night, all day. The problem is we are underfunded. So we have the staff, well, we like to say we're volunteers because it's our community and it's our job. The tough part is I'm glad to know that the county has 11 something million dollars because I'm going to be looking for it because I borrowed from my own 401k to put a company in. I moved from Burlington Capital, so I have a great respect for the folks at Burlington Capital, have a great relationship with them. We've had tons of conversations about this project. But when we're in the business, I cannot separate myself from the business individual and a Black woman that comes out of North Omaha. I'm 35 years old. Thank God I lived to see it. 12 years ago, I was a homeless youth that my mom put out because her husband tried to molest me. So those missing and trafficked kids, I was one of them. Did I commit a lot of crimes? Maybe allegedly. I'm sorry, am I running out of time?
Just 1 minute.
1 minute. I want to get to my point here that if anybody is qualified to process qualitative and quantitative data that talks about what the solutions need to look like in our community, you're looking at her. I have had the hardest time working with functions of the county, specifically the gatekeeper called probation. And I'm glad that Dr. Carball called him that and not myself. I've been a juvenile probation provider since 2016. I have the endorsement of a judge that sends kids to my program, but I can't get paid for it by probation. I've had the hardest time becoming a stability services provider. Nobody can tell me how I should do that. Do I provide these services to 47 families since January 1st this year? We are not receiving a dime from the county to do that. So I would offer that the work that needs to be done in the community, it needs to take a different face because it is the exact reason why we see the disproportionality we see.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board about these issues?
No questions?
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move to the committees. The finance is the budget report as presented. And then we have 2 ARPA funding requests. The first being the approval of a resolution authorizing the award of $117,000 in ARPA funds to Charles Drew Health Center. That's the lead agency. They're in partnership with IB Black Girl to fund a Black maternal health program in North Omaha. This is brought to us by Commissioner Rogers and his ARPA allocation. And then we have an ARPA funding approval of a resolution authorizing the award of $51,600 to the Elkhorn Public Schools for a project to fund peer-to-peer suicide prevention program. And this is brought to us by Commissioner Borgeson in her ARPA allocation. Is there a motion to approve 2 and 3? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Boyle. Any questions or comments on these 2? Blake? There was a motion by Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Boyle seconded it.
Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue. Been a lot of discussion lately about the large amount of fraud in these ARPA funding giveaways by the government, people defrauding the government and therefore the taxpayers. So I'm wondering, who do we have that's going to follow up to make sure that $117,000 is spent for exactly that? And that's going to cost us to pay somebody to do that. But I'd also like, before you vote on this is going to be controversial, but I'd like you to strike the word from the sentence that says fund a Black maternal health program in North Omaha. Entirely inappropriate, I believe, to use that word in that context and with taxpayer dollars. It sort of smacks me in the face. Oh, gee, my wife or my daughter probably can't go to North Omaha to this place. And these poor people can't get maternal care here in Omaha, this big complex that we're building down there at UNO. Why is that? There's something wrong with this. So maybe we don't need this center if things were operated properly. So at least strike that word before you vote. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Boyle?
Want to make a quick comment, and this is, of course, Black maternal health. We see morbidity and mortality higher than in any other population, so that's why this is a priority. Now, to take that a different slant, a completely different slant, is this is actually a cost savings measure. This saves tax dollars because prevention is much less expensive than treatment. So for that reason, this is a cost savings to the taxpayer by approving funding like this if you have to take that angle and you don't have the heart to take it from just it's the right thing to do to create, to hopefully take care of those disparities.
Thank you. Commissioner Morgan?
I want to thank Commissioner Boyle for your expertise, your background, and your input on this issue. Really appreciate that, and thank you for those comments.
And I would, did you, okay, as you're coming up, I just want to throw out there, if somebody who thinks there's not a problem with our Black maternal health system, watch the documentary Aftershock. Thank you. Go ahead.
Jaquela Yarbrough, 2417 Burdette Street, Omaha, Nebraska, 68111. I think the idea is a great idea. I just have a question about the where do we delineate between when we can use race-specific wording to request funding and services and when we cannot? Because as a provider, we've been told that there's no funding that can be allocated specifically for race-targeted issues, specifically in juvenile services.
Commissioner Rogers?
This is federal funding, not state funding. So
Gotcha.
federal funding doesn't have that.
Gotcha.
State funding has the constitutional amendment by Warwick Connolly that prohibited that in the state of Nebraska, but not federal funding.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No other questions or comments? There was a motion and a second. Please vote.
And Madam Chair, this was for both items, correct?
Yes.
Both, okay.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next, we'll move to Human Resources, the weekly personnel from Civil Service as presented. And then we'll move on to our legislative items. Just to give you a brief, you have it in your packet, but again, the last 2 weeks have been committee all-day meetings. Next week, they'll go back to floor debate on bills. Most of it, again, the week of through February 3rd, really was highlighted by the governor's tax proposals, the Heartbeat Act, Election Act, and some Adopt a School and District Property Tax Acts. But we do have, we had LB 337, which Senator Reapy introduced. It was our bill for the Mental Health Practice Act. That was heard on February 3rd in the Health and Human Services Committee. I think it went quite well, and there was one letter of opposition that our lobbyists will work on to see if we can get a more thorough understanding of what the opposition was. Our long-term care facility operations and services appropriation request is going to be heard on February 24th. With that, we do have two bills on the agenda today for a motion to oppose. That is LB 110. This is a change the potential conditions of the pretrial release and provide for pretrial risk assessment services pilot project. and LB 187, which is the requirement to appoint counsel for tenants in eviction proceeding in counties containing a city of metropolitan class or primary class. And this holds a price tag of $1.2 million. And so I'll open it up for conversation on LB 110. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thank you. And Marcos, maybe you could help us going forward. I looked it up, and it's Senator McDonald, but if you could include the introducer's name with the one-liner that you give us, that would shortcut having to look it up. Could you, and I haven't seen the statement of intent, just give us a thumbnail on LB 110 and the reason for your recommended opposition?
Sure. So Commissioners, Marco St. Martin, Douglas County legislation. So I'll just say, I would say in a nutshell, LB 1110, it's a when a county board selects pretrial services, selects a pretrial services program, the decision, there's language in that bill that says the decision should be made per the advice or counsel of the sheriff. And so this, I guess the premise of opposition was brought by the chair to oppose that language in particular.
Okay, if I understand you correctly, this would change it to allow for the sheriff to select?
So it actually includes language that the board of corrections would act per the advice and counsel of the sheriff. So, I think maybe the language could be improved, but I mean, I can give you some historical background on it, but there has been a policy, I will say, going back to 1972, 1974, with the legislature, they established a policy where the more populated counties would essentially have a board of corrections, and those duties would be performed by the board, the county board sitting as the board of corrections, and then the sheriff would be released to do duties specifically only for law enforcement, focused on law enforcement duties. So that's a well-established policy, I think, in Nebraska. Like I said, it goes back to about 1972, 1974.
Sure. So is that policy a statutory requirement?
It is. It has been codified. It was codified, and it is in Chapter 23. But the language has been changed over the years, I believe in the 80s. But in the county attorney's office, can give way more research than I can. But
I
that's
understand.
kind of
I understand. But if I understand what you just said, then LB 110 would change the status quo from the Board of Corrections selecting this. I guess it's a pretrial release assessment service vendor or entity to the sheriff selecting that.
Commissioner, if I may jump in here real quick, this is Patrick Bloomingdale, County Administrator. What it does is it requires the County Board of Corrections to seek the professional guidance and advice of the sheriff when selecting the pretrial release program. That's just part of the bill.
That's right.
But you get into the issue of an elected board being required to seek advice and counsel of another elected official before taking actions that they're statutorily allowed to take. So I don't even know if that's constitutional to require one elected board to have to go to another elected official before they can take action on matters.
Sure. And so what we're saying is, by opposing this, we would be in favor of the statutory codified status quo.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on 110? Commissioner Rogers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna, eventually when everybody gets talking, I'll make the motion and hope there's a second, because there's a couple of reasons. I mean, right off the hand, I think it was alluded to in the last discussion that, I don't think you need to include in seeking the expert opinion, because the Board of Corrections has the expert opinion of the Director of Corrections and everybody that's there. adding that in is no need, and I don't know what it does or where it comes to in some degree. And also, there's an organized body of the Criminal Justice Management Council that meets every month. And it has every invested law enforcement official there to put their input on it. The next piece is, this brings to earth pretrial program pilot where we just got the report 3 or 4 months ago from the Directions Corrector about a pilot that we are doing now that we spent at least 1.5 years with work to craft with the investment and input of judges, prosecutors, OPD. I sat in those meetings. We just had an update meeting Wednesday about making tweaks to it, and it's being evaluated. So sipping this into it, it doesn't even fit, and I don't know where the history of it came from. I think Senator McDonald is the straw man for this, introducing it. The other piece under there, I do not understand that need, because we have a project going on right now that was reported here as being very effective and is making tweaks to it now. Next, I have issue with page 6, line 6, and then 22, because some of these changes seem self-serving in regards to, you eliminate the term up there where it says other supervision techniques deemed appropriate shown by research. You strike that out. But in 22, you go down and you want to use the use of an evidence-informed, validated risk assessment tool to inform the decisions. Evidence-informed, validated risk assessment tool is another word for research. So why is it good at one point and it's not good for the other point in the bill? Then the last point, which is the physical implant is page 7, line 3. It says state county administrators shall reimburse participating counties $150 per day for each defender diverted. Where did that number come from? Because I've never heard, I'd like to hear a number, because I've never heard a number given to us in pretrial about what that cost is. And we're already having battles about the inheritance tax, all this other stuff coming. To put a program in that seems duplicative right now, and we haven't, the board hadn't even been discussed about the physical implement that will come on, leaves questions for doubt, and it needs to have a little more work. So that's why I'm going to oppose it.
Commissioner Friend.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Should come as no shock. You know, it's human nature to, as you can see, if you watch these board meetings or city council or even watch Congress and you tune in close enough, it's human nature for people to migrate to backgrounds and experience when it comes to discussion of subject matter. So it shouldn't be any surprise to you when especially my colleagues, because I've done it over the last couple of years, where I just go, look, I mean, this we've dealt with countless pieces of legislation, and I've raised issues where I said, look, we could sit here and look at all 12 of these items, and we're not going to agree on all of them. I think I said that last time. This is a perfect example for anybody who's actually willing to tune in to what we're doing. Every bill that we make initial determinations on, most every bill that we make internal or initial determinations on, are likely moving targets. And they can or could or will change in structure practically. So we're making determinations right out of the gate. The legislature hasn't even had a hearing yet, and we're making determinations that this thing is just, not practical. Commissioner Rogers and others have made a good point. The troubling thing that I have, the troubling issue, I guess, at this point that I have with LB 110 is that when you codify something in statute like communication or consultation, everything depends on the definition. It depends on the intent. It depends on floor debate. So if this thing actually got out to the floor, which is probably not tremendously likely, if it did, wait till you see the debate on this. It'll be fascinating if you like that type of stuff. If you like to watch sausage getting made, then it'll be fascinating. The interesting part is that's my problem. Because if I was out on the floor, I'd go, well, we need to, if my daughter called me this morning, she won't call, she'll text me. I'll call her. There's a lot of forms of communication, and this does not define it. Now, it will be defined through floor debate. It'll be defined in a lot of various ways. So Commissioner Rogers is right. However, I think it's a tremendous idea in regard to pretrial release to actually communicate with law enforcement. I think it's a good idea. Now, the question is, how do you take both of those things? And maybe Commissioner Rogers is right. It needs some flushing out. And maybe we need to talk to law enforcement and get some of these, ideas fleshed out a little more. If we're being redundant, maybe it's a waste of our time. Maybe this legislation is a waste of time. But I don't know that that's the case. This bill has questions that need to be answered from an implementation standpoint. I also think generally, before I oppose it, I'd like to get some of those questions answered. They haven't even set a hearing date on it. Then we have another bill after this on its face. I'm not supposed to talk about that yet, am I?
No.
Okay. I want to follow parliamentary procedure. Okay, look, I think if we're going to take these things separately, I just either will abstain or, like to work through some of the ideas about 110 and see if they can flush this thing out a little more and make it something that could actually add to the county board's work as opposed to being in conflict with it. So that's kind of my take. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. This is a question for my colleague, Commissioner Friend, because one of the roles you have on our board is the chair of our Criminal Justice Committee, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm just curious, being in that role, if you were consulted at all prior to this bill's introduction.
Great question, and if I dig into my memory bank, which is a little shorter than it used to be, no. Maybe I was told, I don't remember, no. I think my answer is no.
That was my presumption, but I don't like to assume, so I figured I'd ask.
But can I add something, Commissioner Garcia?
Sure.
I don't think there's a lot of these things that that relate to criminal justice that either the introducer or people that are involved in law enforcement or some of the other things that we are directly related with, who have not didn't communicate with me before.
Sure.
Pieces of legislation were dropped. So I don't think that that's totally uncommon.
Sure, though some of the norms currently of lack of communication and partnership and collaboration when it comes to introduction of these bills aren't exactly a norm that I'm fond of to begin with. Also, to your comment, when the bill specifically cites that a county that's 500,000 in population or over is going to implement this new pilot program, I mean, you don't have to say Douglas County for it to say Douglas County, right? So the fact that it does involve us by force, the fact that they did not consult with you as our criminal justice chair, they did not consult with our board or our board chair, I'm presuming there as well. I mean, this is a soapbox from last year, last January. Between government entities, between colleagues who are elected officials, I will always push for communication and collaboration. Sure, a bill can evolve in the legislature. Obviously, it does, usually, if it gets far enough. But the introduction of a bill is a starting point, of course, right? And these starting points and these templates for bills can be done better when people do collaborate with us. And why not brainstorm together how to enhance our criminal justice system? Why not brainstorm together and create good starting point bills, on important matters in criminal justice and other matters that we all deal with as government entities? So I do dislike the fact that that kind of collaboration does not happen more, if at all, really, when it comes to a lot of these bills. I take issue with the next bill for the same reason, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. With that, Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to note on a couple of points. I think to build off Commissioner Garcia's points, I think, you know, in my years of being on this board, I can't remember a time that the board has implemented an action that may come against another elected official without them knowing. Now, they may know it through somebody from the office telling them, or they may know it because they come to the podium and do something that makes the board mad, and the board says we need to do something about that, but they know it. And I just say that for the form of communication, because in my period of being on the time here, the sheriff's office was pretty, and I say this because it references the sheriff's inclusion. I don't know who was behind it, but for years, the sheriff hadn't made point of this. So for this to come up, I have an issue. And whoever made reference to doing this, that line of communication for the years that I have been here has always been through the Criminal Justice Management Council. It's been disputed through there, and the Criminal Justice Management Council has trusted the director to implement to us through the Board of Corrections anything that happens there. Whoever did this, they, I put it like this. To me, basketball, sports and politics have a lot in common. When I was a freshman, you sat two to a seat, you carried equipment, and you did all the grunt work that a freshman does. For somebody to come in and do this without consultation about what's going on is a freshman move when you do not know what's going on and you put all this there. I don't think it needs to be flushed out because all of this stuff has other jurisdictions. And even when this came out and was talking to them, adult probation didn't know anything about it, and they have it. So, you know, that's my issue with it. And you got to learn the processes and you got to respect it to some degree. So whoever was behind this, they should have came to us, and they didn't talk to you, they didn't talk to us, and they wanted to change this without any conversation about what's going on because we already trying to implement this. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Friend?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the dialogue, and I don't even necessarily consider it debate, but you guys know how much I like that. So the interesting part about this, and I think we have to dissect it just real quickly, I talk to law enforcement on a daily basis. I do. It doesn't mean that we talked about LB 110 and that it was actually going to be dropped, nor other bills that are actually going to be dropped. I also will reiterate that we've handled on this county board at an initial standpoint, we've handled almost 100 bills already. And none of those people consulted me. And we made either an opposition or we liked it based on our initial assumption. So look, what I'm hearing a little bit of is, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but like this could have a hint of subversiveness. I don't buy that. When this Sunday, I don't read legislative bills much anymore, but I read these two bills on Sunday night. And then when I got done, I said I should be reading something else because it gave me the cold sweats or whatever. But the interesting part about it is I read them both, and they're both problematic to me. But the interesting part is I can see value. I don't sit back and go, well, why didn't the sheriff's office call me 5 months ago, or why didn't the new sheriff's office call me, or why didn't I get a chance to talk to Chief Schmatter about it, or whatever the case might be? Did I technically know that she was going to drop? Probably not. The point is, do I care, and again, do I think that there was subversive behavior? I don't know if I buy that. I think they want to be, I would say this, I think they want to be part of the solution, help, as opposed to inject themselves into places that they shouldn't be. So I'm gonna leave it at that. I mean, we're talking about law enforcement professionals, Commissioner Rogers, who understand what happens when pretrial actually functions, because they see either the front end or the back end. So I don't see a tremendous amount of harm, I guess, other than the language that we discussed, because communication is a nebulous term. So anyway, Madam Chair, thank you.
Um, I know who requested this, and I know the reason they requested it. And to me, this is, again, it was nothing more than a power move to inject that office into our work as elected officials and as the Board of Corrections. I have had a conversation with Senator McDonald voicing my, that I was upset that there wasn't any conversation with this board, either before or that it was even going to be dropped, that it just appeared. And so again, especially with everything that's been mentioned, that we put together years ago a criminal justice management committee that's made up of every single judicial partner, justice partner that we have to talk about these things round table and to vet them. That's one. Secondly, we had our director up here numerous times and we talked about pretrial. We talked about the need to revamping it. We talked about it being delayed months and months and months because we talked and had around the table every single, again, justice partner for input. So am I a little bit upset about this? Yes, because again, this was brought with someone who hadn't even taken office yet, who didn't know our process, obviously doesn't want to know our process before asking somebody to drop a bill imposing that elected body into our elected authority and decision making. And so lastly, we have been caught as a board, and senators have said many times when we waited to take a position, and that's the hard part about all this. When do you take a position? Well, when we've waited to take positions on something, we are dogged on the floor of the legislature about where were you? You're coming now at the 11th hour. Where were you when this bill was introduced? Why didn't you voice your opinion then? Now all of a sudden it's at the back end, going to be voted either out of committee or on the floor, and now all of a sudden you're speaking. So I'm not going to get caught again in that respect. But the biggest thing here is we've had our director of corrections before this board for over a year and a half talking to us about the need to revamp our pretrial service program. And we had every player at the table helping us, signing off, and making it better. And we've had reports from the time that it has been launched until now that it's going very successful. And so this is, again, unnecessary. It is another elected official robbing us to go to a senator to inject that office into the county board's business. And so with that is why I oppose this bill. There has never been a sheriff in the history of my years that has complained about not being able to pick up the phone, call or come before this board and talk to us about an issue. And we don't need legislation mandating us that we have to have counseled another elected official before we do our duties and responsibility as elected officials. And so with that, we do, again, have a motion and a second. Do you want to say something on LB 110?
Thank you. Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132. Thank you, Mr. Friend. Words indeed do matter. What matters more is who uses them and then who interprets them. Lots of bantering between yourselves about all of this discussion you've had with Department of Corrections. Questions here and questions there. There's a lot of this legislation that we find problematic as citizens, but you don't want to discuss it with us. You want to discuss it with yourselves and call the lawyers, the sheriffs, but you never discuss it with us. You're not very transparent about what bills and what it means and why you're for it or against it. You're not asking the citizens that elected you, should we or should we not? You're making decisions without talking to the citizens. That needs to change because we elected you. I can't vote for or against all 7 of you one at a time. I can only vote for or against one. But at this Civic Center, I can approach all of you at one time. I don't have time to argue it out with all of you. But you're leaving the citizens out. And once again, I can hear everybody else, but I can't hear Mr. Rogers. Do you have a new microphone? That's one of the items of the Open Meeting Act. It's a reasonable opportunity to be able to hear.
Thank you, Larry. That's not.
And it's not
the issue.
reasonable
Thank
if
you,
I've
Larry.
told you time and time again.
Thank you,
And just
Larry.
in the last
That's
last
enough.
discussion.
Larry,
Speak into
thank
the
you.
microphone.
That's
Thank
enough.
you.
Thank you.
Well,
That's enough.
Let that lady go
Do we
on
have
and on,
a
but interrupt
motion
me when I go.
and a second to oppose LB 110? Please vote. Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Boyle. Please vote. $110 only.
Motion passes. Commissioner Friend voting no, other commissioners voting yes.
Next, we have LB 187. This will require appointment of counsel for tenants and eviction proceedings in counties containing a city of the metropolitan class or primary class. Again, it is on the agenda for opposition. Is there a motion to approve? And any questions or comment? Commissioner Boyle?
Yeah, I think this is an example of a unfunded mandate. If there's a way that we could get state funding, I think this would be something I would be actually very much a proponent of. I think that at the same time, to be honest with you, earlier in our meeting, we were talking about social determinants of health, and housing is one. So as a county and as a governmental entity, I really think we should do everything we can for folks who have housing instability. So for that reason, I'm actually going to vote no to the position of opposition of this bill.
Thank you. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
I'm going to support allowing counsel for poor people who are being evicted. We do this routinely for poor people being charged with crimes, and I'm in favor of putting poor people being deprived of their property rights in the same category. There's a possibility, I suppose, that the legislature could discuss funding sources or who would actually pick it up. The fiscal note is an approximation of what it would cost. There's no certainty to that, and so I don't know if they would have any problem with adjusting that, but the concept of providing legal counsel to poor people is one that Nebraska has been in the forefront in the country. We established the first, I believe, public defender's office, first or second in the nation, over 100 years ago, and this is just an extension of that same right to representation to poor people being evicted from their homes. So I would be in favor of this legislation.
Commissioner Rogers?
I just want to know with Commissioner Boyle, that Commissioner Boyle's rationale is mine, and the rationale is, I think, this concept we're doing now with the 3 years worth of funding that we gave $400,000 to help in that effort, and that is not paying the true cost of attorneys. I am all for this if they find a way to fund it, because yes, we've had the public defender's office, but that office primarily dealt in the criminal justice realm. You start dealing in the domestic issues with this issue and how prevalent it is right now, that is a and, you know, the pace that every year the county attorney's office and the public defender's office are coming just for the increases for what we need to do to keep them and the growing demand. This will be a whole nother piece that, you know, is going to be a cost deal. So I would love to support it. I hope it encourages them to find the source to be able to do it. Thanks.
Commissioner Friend?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not a laughing matter. I just thought of something. One of the biggest fears that I continually have since I took this job is trying to figure out maybe a year from now or 2 years from now if we're actually going to be able to satisfy our mandated and non-mandated obligations, the obligations that we've made to the citizens of Douglas County. What this particular bill, if I read it right on Sunday night, essentially is creating, it is codifying, and the state is telling us that we have to create a new program. We don't have any choice. You got to do it. And then they're saying, at least based on my reading, no, there probably won't be any money. Okay, so it's well-intentioned. It's got heart. The bill makes sense, and we can't afford it. I guess in a perfect world, I'd love to, but again, when you start looking, and we're going to know more probably by March, when you start looking at what actually happens to our budget in regard to revenue, I think it'll become a little bit more clear. So we actually want to codify something that tells us that where the state essentially tells us you have to do it, you don't have any choice. That's rough. Now, again, it's at its initial stage. Maybe we can talk to the introducers and do something with it. But if I had to make a decision right now, I'd just say, well, I can't get behind this. So anyway, I think you know my position. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you. Briefly, just wanted to mention that I will abstain for this reason. I do support the concept of if there are people that are being mistreated by landlords and are facing a housing issue that then becomes a legal issue through eviction court, of course, having some kind of legal counsel available for those who can't afford it would be ideal. However, on the other end, as mentioned, this would be adding a service that currently the bill does not provide revenue for. So we're already looking at losing millions, we know, through cuts in the inheritance tax and other issues that are coming before us in the near future. So we need to balance out the revenue side if we're going to be adding a substantial program for every single person hypothetically going through eviction court. That's a lot of attorneys. So if the bill comes back with an amendment that has a revenue source, then I would support the bill if it does come back to us in that manner. So for now, I'll abstain.
Commissioner Garcia actually said it very well, because I feel exactly the same way. No one on this board is going to sit here and say this is a bad idea to try to help people who are poor from not getting evicted. Commissioner Rogers brought up the funding that we have provided an entity to do that, so I think we've put our money where our mouth is. With this, it is an unfunded mandate. We have taken positions about not supporting unfunded mandates. Right now, with current bills, just the cursory look at them, there's about $2.7 million of new costs to counties of new mandates without any funding attached. Don't know if those bills are going to go anywhere, but again, bills that are thrown out there at a cost to county taxpayers without any state funds, but a mandate from the state that the counties have to provide. That's on top of our potential revenue loss of over $28 million when it comes to some legislation that's been introduced, and Commissioner Garcia mentioned one about the inheritance tax. So I would suggest, and our lobbyists, I'm sure, will be listening to this and take our direction, there is funding that we have to provide to the state for the Office of Public Advocacy. That money, I have always contended, takes away from our public defender's office and funds everybody else in the state. There was a time when we did go down and try to get that money back to be able to fund our public defender's office, because again, we have the best public defender's office in the state of Nebraska, which I know there aren't many, that's why they created this, but it's at the detriment of our public defender's office. So if this bill, if they want this bill and our support, there should be funding, and one source of that funding is to give us back what they're taking from us to fund the public advocacy office. So I think further discussion needs to be had on it, because I think, as we said, there's nobody here that's going to say we're against poor people having representation. But again, it should not be a new mandate, unfunded from the state. So with that, do we have a motion and a second? Yes. We did. Commissioner Rogers made the motion. Commissioner Morgan seconded it. Any further questions or comments? Larry? Again, this is LB 187.
I'm not sure this is the right time. Were you about to close the meeting? Or, I mean, the legislative portion? Anyway.
We have not, nope, if you're not going to talk on 187, hang on one second. Just,
yeah.
Okay. You're not going to talk on LB 187, correct?
No.
No, okay, just hang on then 1 second. Anybody else, 187?
Jaquela Yarbrough, 2417 Burdette Street, Omaha, Nebraska, 68111. Can you guys hear me? I love you, Larry. I would advocate for, I just think of we get a lot of this on the front end, this issue, where with our particular Family Resource Center, I think we were one of the first in Omaha to actually do this, but we have a systems navigation piece where people can come in and we actually help them prepare their own briefs. I'm not an attorney, so I cannot speak for them in court, but I will say that I do all of that for free. So I would ask this board to seriously reconsider, if your only reason for not supporting is because it goes unfunded. Let's figure out a way to get it in the budget some way, shape, or form, because it is a dire need. It's something that we probably spend a third of our time on. And we never turn folks down. If they come in on a Sunday afternoon and I'm in church, I say, I'll meet you there, because it makes a difference. All of your constituents, at some way, shape, or form, are facing eviction. As a single mom, I got into helping people because I had to learn how to prepare those motions myself. I had to learn how to speak myself, because legal aid isn't always available to assist you, and you may have to go to court. And I will say that I started winning. So it is worth looking at and putting the resources towards. If you guys as a board can figure out the funding piece, or at least, I guess, implore them to figure out the funding piece, I would wholeheartedly encourage you to support that for the sake of your constituents.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on 187? There is a motion and a second. Please vote.
Motion passes. Commissioner Garcia abstaining, Commissioners Kavanaugh and Boyle voting no, all other commissioners voting yes.
Let's see, other legislation? Now, Larry.
Larry Storer, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132. Yeah, some of the legislation that's going to be talked about this week down in Lincoln that seems to be sneaking in under the tent, I want to comment about. The language to insert LGBTQ and gender or whatever language into some of our legislation is concerning to me also, Mr. Friend, because I don't know that it's written into the Constitution or federal civil rights law yet. So therefore, if you're inserting them into some of your resolutions, proclamations, ordinances, or the city is, but the state hasn't inserted it in the state law yet, then probably you're committing illegal acts. So I think I would back off on inserting those words and programs for two more protected classes of people. I don't think that maybe your lawyers can tell me, has it been written into the civil rights laws? Is it official, a federal law? If it's not, then I think you need to rethink a lot of those things. And you need to go down to Lincoln and represent us down there to tell them not to insert it into the state law unless it's a federal law already. Speak for us too. There are unfunded mandates for us. It's okay for you guys to complain, but apparently not for us. Thank you.
With that, we have no other legislative items at this time. We do have need for executive session for contract negotiations and legal advice. Before we do go into executive session, I will announce that our Douglas County offices will be closed February 20th in observance of President's Day, and that the board will not meet on Tuesday, February 4th, but we wish you all a happy Valentine's Day, and Tuesday, February 21st, which we do also wish you a happy President's Day. So the next meeting will be Tuesday, February 28th. With that, I do need a motion to go into executive session for contract negotiations and legal advice. Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Morgan. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0. Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Morgan to reconvene and adjourn. Motion passes 6-0. Commissioner Kavanaugh is absent. We are adjourned at 11:58 a.m.